Hello, everyone. I'm Angelarosa Donato.
And I'm Marion Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn nursing podcast supported by the Panola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm. Today, on a bonus episode of Amplify Nursing, Angela and I thought it'd be fun and entertaining, if to no one else but ourselves, to interview each other. We talk about our paths to nursing, how we spend our time when not hosting this podcast, and our thoughts on all the things related to the profession. Hey, Angela.
What's going on, Marion?
You know, a little this, little that.
Yeah, I know.
Today, we're going to do a special bonus Amplify Nursing episode where we're going to interview each other. I'm very excited about this.
That sounds like fun.
Does it? You don't I don't hear any enthusiasm in your voice, man.
You know what, Marion? You know how I feel about being the center of attention. I'm very excited about interviewing you.
This is going to be painless, I promise.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
So, since you're so uncomfortable, let's do you first and see how this goes.
Jump in and get it over with.
So,
okay, go for it.
We've been working together on this podcast for, I don't know, a year now? Maybe?
Just about.
Just about a year. And
I can answer that question.
I know a little bit about you, but let's dig deep here. So, what was your path to nursing? We ask all of these other guests how they sort of came to nursing, what they focus on, and all that good stuff. How did you come to nursing? Was this something you knew was, your calling from when you were little, or is this something you sort of fell into? Tell me the tale.
So it was definitely something that I fell into. I don't know if you noticed, but the surefire way to get me not to do something is to suggest that I do something. And at some point along the line, my mother suggested I be a nurse. So I decided to be a communications major.
Nice.
And then I was going to go to law school. But, then things change and your perspective changes a little bit and you do things like start having babies and getting married. So then you shift really quickly. And just as, I still was going to school. So I took an anatomy course and I absolutely loved it. And it was so much fun. And then I took microbiology and I absolutely loved that. And I'm like, well, maybe I will do nursing. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened, and it all kind of worked out. It worked out really well. Timing is super interesting for me. Like things never work out at like a really good time. So because I started going to school a little bit later, many of my friends went into nursing like right away, like from high school. They went into nursing programs, and because I waited a little bit longer, I was a year or two behind everyone. So everybody that I knew, like there were sign-on bonuses and like all this like crazy stuff. And then I started when the downturn hit and they started laying everybody off. So I graduated from nursing school and, fortunately, at that point I'd had another baby. So I like took my boards. A week later I had Daniel, and then I had an extended maternity leave. And then in Philadelphia anyway, it was the Allegheny Health System at the time. They laid everybody off. So I wasn't working. And then I was just kind of taking my time trying to find a job. And then my oldest son was diagnosed with cancer. So it all kind of worked out really well because then I was home when he initially started his treatments. And I got a job right as I was, starting to be able to, spread out a little bit. So it worked out well.
So you were a comms major at first.
Mm-hmm.
Why communications? I'm just curious because now that we're hosting a podcast, and communications is one of my favorite things to do.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know that about you. So what was your thinking there? And do you still do anything other than this podcast related to communications?
Probably not. That's the running joke with my best friend. Like when I told her I was doing this podcast, she's like, "Wow, your one semester at Temple is really, really coming through for you right now."
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think at the time I was 17 years old. I think at the time I probably wanted to be like a DJ or something like that. Like I've always been a
I could
music.
totally see that of you.
Yeah, I've always been a music person. So that was probably where I was headed with it, to be honest. At 17, that seemed like the dream job, right? I mean, and then the flip side of it is too, is that I was not very, the irony of it was I was not very communicative as a younger person. So my parents were scratching their heads when they're like, "You're going to be a communications major. You don't speak. You don't say anything to anybody. You just kind of grunt."
Well, communications is more than speaking, right? We all have
Yeah.
our ways. I personally am not a great vocal communicator. I'm a much stronger written communicator and
Hmm.
visual communicator. So, we all have our strengths in communication.
Yeah, true story.
And look how good you are at hosting this podcast.
Yeah, I hope so. It's definitely, I definitely find it to be extremely rewarding. So, and I think that's the trick. I think that's the trick to it, is that I get so much joy out of it. And I love learning about all of the really cool things that people do.
Yeah, people are
So,
fascinating and doing just some amazing stuff.
yeah.
So, all right. So you got your nursing degree,
Hmm.
and then what?
So I've always been a school person. So I went to community college for nursing because, like I said, I had little guys at the time, and I was married at the time. So, I was multitasking on many levels. And then, you know, at some point I decided to go back and pursue my BSN. And I shifted from med surge to critical care. My oldest son, who I said earlier, had started his treatment. His treatment was finished. He, was in remission. He was better. So, then I started picking up where I left off. I went back to school. I transitioned to critical care, and was just kind of weighing my options at that point, trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do.
So, can I ask you? There's
Yeah.
a huge debate in nursing, and this comes up on Twitter a lot. And my thoughts on this have changed dramatically over the years. But what are your thoughts on associate degree nursing programs versus bachelor's degree nursing programs and how that fits into the profession?
Yeah. So, I mean, I I think at this stage of the game, it's so accessible to just have a bachelor's degree be an entry level. Um, and there's probably great ways to do it that you could, connect. Wouldn't necessarily have to dissolve those community college programs. You could just sort of link them up with another program and let it continue. I'm not sure why nursing didn't do it before. I think that there's so much to be said for the diploma programs and the ADN programs, because I think they're so technically savvy, because the focus is on the clinical content. And, when you're in a BSN program, that's when you start to get the theory and things like that. So I feel like we would be better off as a profession if we just had entry level BSN. That's the short answer, I think. Not to say that the other programs don't produce incredibly competent and great nurses, but it's used as leverage against us. You know, we're the largest component of the healthcare workforce and the least educated component of the healthcare workforce. So therefore, we have a tendency to be marginalized because we're not seen as, you know, as educated as everybody else.
And by educated, you mean solely degree wise.
Exactly. Solely degree wise. Yeah. Which is the thing, right? It's the piece of paper.
Right.
You know, that everyone sits on. So, yeah.
It's a complicated topic because I, for years, agreed with you that we need, at minimum, bachelor's degree entry level because of everything you just said. But thinking about where we are in this country and racial inequality and making certain things more accessible for all people, not just certain segments of the population of people. I think there's a place for it, though. It's complicated.
Yeah.
I want everybody to have the opportunity to do these types of professions, and sometimes bachelor's degrees are not accessible to everyone because of the barriers financially and from time commitments. You know, people have to work.
Right.
So if the only option you have is to do an associate's degree and work and then go back for your bachelor's or whatnot, I mean, I think it's a great road for entry for certain people.
So, and I think what you're pointing to I am a prime example of that. So I, you know, had children very young. I was working, I was married. I went through an ADN program and then eventually finished my doctorate. So had I not had the opportunity to do, you know, that community college piece in the beginning, I would not have been able to finish and complete.
And I know so many people who've done the same exact thing as you. They started with an ADN program and now have PhDs and DNPs, and you know, it was definitely their only option in at whatever point in their life they started.
Right. So, but unfortunately, here's the problem. So if you think about all of the hospitals, systems and such that we have in Philadelphia, most of them won't take you unless you have a BSN. So now you graduate from an ADN program and you can't work in a hospital. You know, Hahnemann was the only one, and the Frankfurt Health System, which was ARIA for a little bit, also took ADNs because they had a nursing program, but then their nursing program dissolved. They became part of Jefferson. So now you can't work any of the major hospitals. So then, you know what I mean? So now what? So then you know, your choices of nursing are limited. So, and I'm not saying that, you know, I feel like we definitely could design a bachelor's prepared nursing program that could work for working people. I mean, we do executive programs for all kinds of stuff, for MBAs, the doctoral programs, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it stands to reason that we could create a bachelor's program that could do the same for people that actually have to work.
Yeah, I was just having a very similar conversation with a colleague, not about bachelor's degree, but about other degree programs, specifically the PhD program, because most programs only allow you to go full-time. Very few allow you to go part-time. And how, again, this comes back to systemic barriers that allow some segments of the population to go on and get advanced degrees, but is a complete barrier for other people to be able to do that. And if we really want to promote racial justice and equity, we need to start thinking differently about how we allow people into these different educational degree programs and in what ways we're doing that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's an excellent point.
Then what happened?
So I was bachelor's degree. I was working at the time. I was working in the PACU, and I had a conversation with a CRNA colleague of mine, a lovely person that I worked with, and we were just kind of chit-chatting back and forth. And where I worked at the time, they didn't have like a navigation system so that you could see what was going on. So when you were in charge in the PACU, you had to literally go in from OR to OR to figure out like what the timing was for all the cases, so you can figure out how you were going to schedule the rest of the day. So I was doing my thing, popping in and out of the ORs, trying to figure out, what cases were going to happen. And, one of the CRNAs, like I said, that I was friendly with, we just started sort of chit-chatting, and something in the case sort of caught my attention, and I was looking, and she started to talk a little bit about it. And she was like, you should really think about working back here with us. And I said, being an OR nurse. And she said, no, you should go in anesthesia. I think you'd be really good at it. And I was like, oh, that's super interesting, because it's not something I ever considered before. So then I started to talk about it with some of my other friends, and I started to think about it a little bit. And then I thought, all right, well, if I'm going to do that, then I wanted to get, I needed to go into the ICU to get some ICU experience anyway. So I decided to go to HUP and work in the trauma ICU, because I figured, I would get a really good critical care experience. And I was not wrong there. So
No.
yeah, you also worked at HUB, so the level of acuity is there, and the evidence-based practice. Yep. And it's very, very different from any other place. It was wonderful. And that job, I worked on Rhodes 5, which was the trauma unit at the time, and it was one of my favorite jobs that I ever had. I worked with an amazing group of people. We did really, really cool stuff. We saw really neat things. It was a very complicated place to work too. It was super interesting, but I loved it. So, and then I went from there into the anesthesia program at Penn.
Cool. And so from there, so you're now working as the associate director of the Penn Nurse Anesthesia Program, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So how did that all come about? So clearly from starting as a nurse anesthetist, you fell in love with it and decided that you would help others.
I did. Well, you know what? I will say this. I always had this feeling that I was given great opportunities to do things. And I wanted to make sure that I provided those opportunities to other people as well. I was very, very grateful for the opportunities that I had. And I loved my time at Penn. It was phenomenal. The program director at the time is Maria Van Pelt, who is the dean of the School of Nursing at Northeastern right now, was phenomenal. And such a great person and such a great mentor. And I just felt like I was obligated to provide that same kind of mentorship to other people. I graduated from the nurse anesthesia program at Penn. I started working. And of course, I was at Penn Nursing when the mantra was care to change the world. And I took that very seriously. I guzzled that Kool-Aid down. So my first job, I irritated everyone with I'm going to fix all of the problems and be involved in all of the things. So I had some really great opportunities to sit on some committees and make some really big changes and decisions. And I created a lot of really good connections. And at the same time, the program at Penn was starting to consider the transition to a DNP program with the nurse anesthesia program. So they were looking into how's that going to look, and we need to partner with the hospital system, and we need to think about what student projects are going to look like and all those different kinds of things. So ironically, the program director after Maria was a guy named Ruslan, who was also wonderful. He was there when I was there also. He came over to talk to somebody at Pennsylvania Hospital about student projects. And they were like, well, then you need to talk to Angela because she's involved in all these things. And he was like, why didn't you tell me you were doing all these things? You know what I mean? So then I came back to Penn, and I was the simulation coordinator for a few years, which was also fantastic. I think simulation learning is so much fun. It's stress inoculation. It's hands-on practice. And, it's like, I look at it as like a safe place. It's a safe space where you can let the patients die and it's totally okay, and then you can look at it and say, well, what happened? You know what I mean? And how do I not let the patient die when the patient's a real patient next time? So I had a great time putting that together. And then as we transitioned to the DMP, I had to start to think about, getting my own doctoral program, because when I graduated from Penn, it was just an MSN. And, so I started looking at different programs, and I went up to Yale. And again, I completely fell in love with it. I go with my gut on a lot of things. So I went up there and I talked to them and I was like, this is a great vibe. I really like this. And, it was just phenomenal. The cohort that I was a part of, I was the only CRNA in the group, which I loved, because I got to learn, all of these different perspectives. And it really made me up my game in terms of how I look at things, because especially in anesthesia, we can really be tunnel vision, because we're legitimately like locked in a box, paying attention to one thing at a time. So it's very easy to become hyper focused on, one particular thing. And it's typically the thing that's affecting me. So having this broader view of being able to say, yes, this is really important, but how does it connect with all of the other things that are going on? And how do I offset the issues that I can possibly be creating through what I'm doing here with what needs to happen for these providers on this end? Like, how do we kind of gel all that together? So I think it's, but it was, all around an amazing experience. And Yale is just a super cool place to be.
Can you talk a little bit about why you went DNP versus PhD? I know we've had this conversation before, because I'm in the PhD program part-time at Penn Nursing. What were your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts on that are that I was clinically focused. And, the purpose of the DMP, we have this huge gap in the research that's being produced from the point that it's being produced to the point that it's actually being enacted at the bedside. Anywhere from 7 to 10 years is like the estimate by the time something comes out. So what we needed to do is think about, how are we going to implement these things? And that's what the DMP is all about. And the DMP at Yale was very hyper focused on, really being super critical of the evidence that's out there, and then putting a plan in action in order to get it working at the bedside, to streamline the things that are happening. So, for me, I was really excited about that piece of it. I'm, maybe a little high energy, a little bit of a much more of a hands-on doer.
I hadn't noticed.
So, the thought of, not that I'm not interested in doing my own research, because I definitely have some critical thoughts, but my, I think, natural line of thinking is much more it's a much more creative implementation of things. And I'm really hoping to, and excited at the idea of collaborating with, like, I can't wait until you're finished with your PhD, because I have some great ideas that we can do, things that you can research and I can implement. I had the opportunity to take a class at Oxford by a guy ran the class. His name is Ken Catchpole, and he is an expert in human factors in healthcare. So I read a bunch of his research. I actually came across a whole bunch of his stuff when I was doing my own project for school. And I, really liked the way he brought human factors science into healthcare, because it makes sense. And he talked specifically about, communication and things like that. So I don't even remember how it happened, but I kind of came across this class. He was having this intensive. It was a week-long intensive at Oxford. I got accepted. I had the opportunity to go. So I went. And one of the things that he talked about is that, his assessment was one of the bigger problems in nursing, in healthcare in general, nursing specifically, I guess, is that there's no providers that do a very good job of straddling clinical care and administrative care. So you have clinicians that are doing things. When clinicians are really very good, they get promoted into administrative positions, and they no longer practice clinically, but then they're making all these clinical decisions. But clinical practice changes, and I mean, when I go to the ICU now, I'm not really exactly sure what's going on, because practice has changed so much in the 10 years since I've been there. And so now you have, people who are labeled as clinical experts that are in administrative positions that are making policy changes that are not really conducive to good practice at the bedside, because they're not practicing anymore. So that's, go ahead.
What about clinical nurse specialists though? Is that who you're talking about?
So that's a bridge. No, I wasn't talking about them specifically. I was just talking about policy in general.
Okay.
So, and yes, a clinical nurse specialist is a perfect person who's supposed to be straddling both sides. However, there's not a ton of those, you know what I mean? Right. And not everybody utilizes them. So, and I also don't think they're utilized to the full extent of their scope of practice, which is, I think, most nursing anyway. We're never utilized to the full extent of what we could be utilized for. And you know my thoughts on that, because I feel like we should be everywhere.
Well, right. So tell us your thoughts on that, because I think your thoughts on that are really interesting and need to be heard.
So
while you're talking about that, talk about the state organization that you are now the president of.
Yeah.
I think that all goes together, right?
Okay. So, yeah. So in my, I really love being a CRNA, and I really appreciated all the opportunities that I had, and I really wanted to give back. So I started to volunteer with our state organization. Then I was elected to the board. And this year I'm the president of the organization, which, it's been a challenge with all of the things between a global pandemic and racial tensions, and there's lots of divisiveness within our national organization. So there are a lot of wild things going on right now.
Which organization is this?
It's the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists. I am the president of the Pennsylvania Association of Nurse Anesthetists. So the 3,000 CRNAs that are in Pennsylvania are a part of my organization. So, it's been a wild ride. It's been really an interesting thing to have to navigate, and to, and it's been a little bit stressful, to be honest, to try and think about decisions that are in the best interest of everyone in the group, and I think that's the one thing, being a part of this organization and being so high up in the leadership of the organization, that has really changed my perspective on things, is that thinking about how the decisions I make are going to affect all of these other people. So it's definitely, it's been interesting.
You know what they say, heavy is the head.
Yeah.
Where's the crown?
I guess so. It's not really a crown. It's more of a tiara with the Pennsylvania Association.
I think you look good in a tiara. So, but then talk about scope of practice and how you think either CNRNAs or others in the profession are not being utilized to our fullest.
Yeah, well, I think so. Advanced practice nursing, I think, has been one of the best things to happen to our healthcare system. It started off as filling a gap because we needed to be able to provide care to people. And, nurses do a great job of that. I mean, it's the basis of everything that we do. And it gets really complicated because advanced practice nursing looks different in every state. And it's also very different depending upon what your specialty is. So, for example, in the state of Pennsylvania, even though I have a doctoral degree from Yale and extensive training in anesthesia from the University of Pennsylvania, I'm not recognized by the state as any more than a bedside RN. I have no title recognition. And, it's interesting to me that, and there's lots of talk around supervision, and that there's constant discussions around advanced practice nurses of any flavor needing to have physician supervision. So the thing that's really interesting to me is that as bedside RNs, there's no supervision at all, at anywhere. There's no supervisory language at anywhere at any point in nursing. And then when you become advanced practice, you need to have physician supervision. There has to be some sort of something, agreement or whatever. And the only difference is that advanced practice nurses perform billable procedures and bedside nurses do not. So, then there's this interesting, the crux of the whole thing is billing. And it's unfortunate, and it creates a lot of weird issues and muddies the waters. And the whole purpose, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is that nursing is such an enigma to everyone, that no one seems to know what nurses do. And, one of the things that I found really interesting is that when I would visit policymakers in Harrisburg and we would talk about, scope of practice, or we would talk about title designation, and they would just kind of be like, well, don't you need the doctor to tell you what to do? Like, isn't he there standing there the whole time with you telling you? And I'm just like, well, no, that's not how we work. We work together. I work in a care team model, and I have a very collaborative, relationship with the physicians that I work with. But no, I'm not standing there waiting to be told what to do. I'm performing things independently, and they need me to. They're running 4 other rooms. You know what I mean? Like, they have lots of other things going on. They're not, they need me to be professional in my work. So it was an opportunity, this podcast is an opportunity not just to, show what I do, what we do as CRNAs, but also to say, well, no, there's nurses that are doing incredible things, nurses that are doing great things in innovation, nurses that are, running clinics, nurses that are, executive leadership in different places. And people, I think in general, don't think of nurses as being able to do those things. And we gain so much skill all along the way that is perfect for all of these things. And even like when you think about now, like the incredible racial tension that we're going through, and, people are talking about, defunding police departments and all this kind of stuff. Nurses should be in those spaces.
Totally.
Healthy communities are safe communities. You know what I mean? Like, community nursing and public nursing is not something that we invest in as a society in the United States, and we should be. And, it makes perfect sense to me that nurses should be working in conjunction with police officers to take care of many of the social aspects of what is happening here. And I feel like, unfortunately, because as a profession, historically we've been marginalized, that we're often as a profession sitting back and waiting for people to ask us to do things. And I don't sit back and wait for anybody to ask me to do anything. So I'm only one person. I can't do all the things, but if I could do all the things, I would be reaching out to city government. I'd be reaching out to even the fire department, you know what I mean? Like the police, like there's places for nursing in all of those things. Anything that has anything to do with the public in general, nursing should be involved in.
Totally. And that's where this profession started, right? Like
right.
We were out in the community working on social justice issues back, months of years ago. So
Right.
this is where we started, and I think it's where we need to get back to. I mean, I want to do all the things too. So I'm right
Hmm.
there with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are my thoughts on all the things.
I love your
Um,
thoughts on all the things. And that's our next podcast. All the thoughts and all the things.
yeah. And the flight of ideas that goes along with it. All right. So enough about me.
So,
You have said over and over how you are an activist first and you fell into nursing through your activism. So please tell me all about it.
well, all right. So I didn't ever know really what I wanted to be when I grew up, and nursing never was on my radar. I wanted to do like I still do a plethora of things every day. I think I want to do something different. So when I was young, I wanted to be an artist, and then I really always wanted to do something in science. I was obsessed with astronomy and NASA and outer space and physics and all that stuff. But I didn't really have any guidance on how to do any of those things, so I never really went down that path. Um, and after high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I ended up not going to college and working for a variety of nonprofit organizations, mostly around AIDS service work. So a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
different AIDS service organizations. And while I was living in Boston, I was working at a residential program for people who had HIV/AIDS, were in recovery, and had mental illness. So it was a triple diagnosis house. And I
Mm-hmm.
was uh, I was doing case management and working with just this incredible home health nurse. I mean, I had no idea what nursing did other than what I saw on television, which back in
Mm-hmm.
the day and still sort of now just shows nurses taking orders in a clinical setting from physicians. And that's basically it. And
Mm-hmm.
you know me well enough to know I don't take orders from anyone. So um, there was no way I was going into nursing if that's what nursing was. And
Right.
so, but then I saw this nurse and I could not believe the autonomy that she had, the knowledge and empathy and dedication to her patients that she had. Um, it opened my mind up to the profession that I never knew existed. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I could do this because I have this thing with I have a twin sister,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a friend, Gilbert, who was my sister's best friend. And
Okay.
the three of us had what we called our superhero pact. He was going to be a
Mm-hmm.
cop, I was going to be a nurse, and Jen was going to be a firefighter. And together we were going to like save the world, or at least the Philadelphia area.
Okay.
Um, and so he became a cop. He was the first openly gay cop in Philadelphia, ended up sadly taking his own life.
Oh.
This was like 20 years ago. And it really opened my eyes, and I think obviously opened Jen's eyes about like what we wanted to do with our lives. And so shortly after that, I started really thinking like I want to do something more impactful. And seeing
Mm-hmm.
this nurse, I was like, okay, I have to start moving on this. So I actually started taking classes at a community college in Boston, and then finally moved back to Philadelphia. And it wasn't a straight path though. So I moved back to Philadelphia, and I still was like, well, I don't know if nursing is right for me. I know this one nurse was incredible, but I still didn't know anything about the profession. And I still
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So not floundered. I I just wasn't sure. I
Vacillated. You
vacillated.
vacillated.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I went back and I was like, well, maybe I'll do something more creative. So I enrolled into an art school, and I
Mm-hmm.
lasted a semester there. And I was like, okay, this was a huge mistake. I am not nearly talented enough to be at art school. And I really did have the draw to like do something that was going to make a difference in people's lives. And so I was like, okay, this isn't working for me. And so then I was like, as I was working, because I wasn't going to school full time, I was working full time. I was back producing events for nonprofit organizations and the city of Philadelphia. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just get my degree in tourism and hospitality and just keep producing events for nonprofits, because then I can help them raise funds. And so I started at Temple in their tourism and hospitality program. And about a year into that, I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Why am I getting a degree in something I'm already doing? And I really want to be helping people at a more intimate level. And I was like, okay, I need to just do some more research about nursing, because I kept going back to thinking about that nurse in Boston and how much of a difference she was making. But I never ever wanted to be a bedside nurse. I knew I was not going to do well in a confined clinical environment. And so, like I said, I always was interested in science. I wanted to ask and answer questions. And then while I was doing some research, I saw that Thomas Jefferson University had a brochure talking about a nurse researcher. And I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. And so I looked into that and decided that that was definitely what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to be creative in a way that allowed me to have my own sort of field of inquiry. And it was in the nursing profession. It was, just enough science to get me interested and to really be able to make a difference. And so I ended up doing my first couple of years of nursing at Temple, and then transferred to Jefferson to finish up my bachelor's degree. And then ended up working in the medical ICU for a year at HUP. And again, I never wanted to be a bedside nurse, and this confirmed it for me. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I have so much respect for my colleagues, nursing colleagues in the ICUs at HUP, but I'm sure in other ICUs across the country. They are just incredible clinicians who I would want to be there taking care of me if I was ever, found myself in one of those units, because they were just smart and dedicated and just some of the best clinicians I've ever had the honor of knowing. But that wasn't me. I was a fine bedside nurse, but I hated every second of it. Could not wait to get out of there. And after a year, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to apply for a nurse research coordinator position with the group, the Center for Resuscitation Science. And from there, my career took off.
All right. So tell me about the Center for Resuscitation Science. I remember when you and I first met, you talking about some of the really, really cool projects that you were doing.
Yeah.
And some of the interesting things that you learned about people in resuscitative science.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I couldn't have been doing what I was doing with the Center for Resuscitation Science if I hadn't been a medical ICU nurse. It really gave me the street cred that I needed and the understanding of how the hospital system worked. So at the Center for Resuscitation Science, we did research around in-hospital cardiac arrest, CPR quality, post-resuscitation care, and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, also CPR training and education. So anything that has to do with resuscitation. And so it was an interesting mix of both research and also some clinical work, because we were also the resuscitation team that responded anytime there was a cardiac arrest in mostly at HUP, but right at the time there was only 3 Penn Medicine hospitals, so Penn and Presby also. But most of our work at HUP, and And so anytime there was a cardiac arrest, we would respond, sometimes just for our research studies, but a lot of times as a resuscitation consult team. So helping with the resuscitation, but also then we would handle all of the post-resuscitation care sort of guidelines and help as a consult to the team when they were taking care of somebody who was undergoing targeted temperature management.
Okay.
And it was really interesting because it let me still be a little bit clinical, but in a very different way. And so I liked that a lot more. And so as I was with the Center for Resuscitation Science for 12 years and really worked my way up from a nurse research coordinator where I was overseeing somebody else's research to becoming a nurse researcher, to becoming the principal investigator of my own research studies, my own grants, and having my own research team that could help me sort of with my vision of what I wanted to study. And that's where I really started getting involved in innovation, science communication, those sorts of things, because my area of research was looking at how we integrated technology into training and education. So using virtual reality, augmented reality, others like 3D printing, social media, things like that to incorporate into CPR training.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I remember you were talking about the virtual reality thing that you were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think in all education, I think our education system needs some revamping. K through 12, higher ed, all across the board. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can innovate how we're training and educating people in all sorts of ways, and especially for, you know, high acuity, low, especially for areas where it doesn't happen all the time, and especially for general public folks who aren't going to experience these types of emergencies on any regular basis, to be able to train them in a way that not only heightens stress and anxiety so that they're not caught off guard when it happens to them, but also prepares them mentally and with the knowledge they need. There are ways to do that in more innovative ways that I don't think we've yet incorporated. So I had been working as a resuscitation researcher and, resuscitation nurse for a decade. And I was walking home from the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl parade. Go Birds. This was a couple years ago now. And came upon somebody who had a cardiac arrest in the middle of Broad Street. And
oh my.
There were a couple cops and a lay responder, trying to revive this person. And I will say, again, I was 10 years into doing this resuscitation-focused work where all I did was, eat, sleep, and think about CPR, teaching people how to do CPR, researching how to do CPR, coding more people in the in-hospital setting than I could ever care to remember, even though they should all be remembered. But I mean,
right.
Like in between working in the medical ICU and then responding to every cardiac arrest event, I had coded more than my fair share of patients. And I will say, coming upon this person in an out of context in the out of hospital setting, it took me what felt like minutes to register what was going on and get my bearings and start to perform CPR in a way that was meaningful and effective. So I can't even imagine what it's like for the lay public who may have taken a CPR class 10 years ago or may have never taken a CPR class, to be able to get that courage to step up and respond and do something. And so I think, again, that comes along with needing to better train people for these types of situations. Because even someone like me who does it all the time, I needed my brain to catch up.
We were lucky enough to have you come over to the School of Nursing.
So yes. So before that, so my entry into the School of Nursing. So after I got my BSN, I worked in the MICU for a year, And then I took this gig with the Center for Resuscitation Science. And while I was there, I did a dual master's program at Penn, Masters of Science in Nursing and Masters of Public Health. Did that part-time for 7 years while I was at the Center for Resuscitation Science. I like to take the slow road to higher education.
That's totally fine.
And then I started working part-time at the School of Nursing. I helped to put together their research residency program for the senior undergrad nurses. And so all of the senior nurses have to do this research residency where they go out and they work with different nurse researchers on their projects, learning about research in the real world setting. And so I was the associate course director and then the co-course director for that for a few years. Until I became the innovation person at Penn Nursing. And so I had been asking for years for this position. And it just so happened to nicely work out with the dean's mission and vision of incorporating innovation into the School of Nursing also. And it's like most things in my life, it's all about good timing. And so they brought me over part-time, just 1 day a week, while again, I was still working. So at that point, I was the director of innovation research at the Center for Resuscitation Science. So running the innovation sort of program there. And so they bought out 1 day of my time to come over to the School of Nursing and work on what an innovation program might look like at the School of Nursing. And clearly it went really well because within a very short period of time, I was working on that 3 days a week. So they bought out 3 days of my time. And then they brought me over officially as the director of innovation full-time about 1.5 years ago. So February of last year.
Okay.
And so since then, we've been sort of on a roll doing a lot of really great things at the School of Nursing to promote innovation, both to faculty and staff and also students.
Yeah. Yeah. You're involved in some really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of great stuff. And I'll say, my position falls under the Office of Nursing Research and Innovation. So Dr. Terry Richmond is my my colleague and boss. And we've been doing a lot of really great things. I'll rattle off a few of them and then we can decide what we want to talk about. But, I teach a course called Innovation in Health, which is a course that is both, it's housed out of the School of Nursing, but it's open to any upper level undergrad and any graduate student across the university. So it's a nice mix of nursing students and other students interested in learning about design thinking and innovation in health and healthcare. So we have engineering students and students from Wharton, from medicine, from vet, Penn Dental. I mean, it runs the gamut. Any student can take it. And it's a nice interdisciplinary course where we're really teaching students how to think differently about health or healthcare problems. From there, we also created a free online open access platform called Design Thinking for Health that was a partnership with the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation that anyone, anywhere can use to either incorporate into their own classrooms or into their existing health system workshops or curriculum so that nurses can learn what nursing innovation is, but also, again, the methodology of design thinking, which is a human-centered approach to solving problems in a empathetic and creative way. So we're doing a lot around that.
Yeah, I love that design thinking site. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we are addressing problems, not just in healthcare, but everywhere, needs to really focus more on a human-centered, society-centered way where we're, and you've heard me say this numerous times, we're not going out and telling people what it is that we think they need. We're allowing them to show us, tell us, and then work with us to create a solution that meets their needs that they know they have. And so to be able to really understand a problem and create a solution to that problem, the people who are experiencing that problem have to be involved. And I think in general, if we use that approach for everything in life, things would be a little bit better than where we're at right now.
That's very true.
Yeah. So I'm a big proponent of these sort of human-centered approaches to solving all sorts of problems.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, when I come across conflict and things like that in my clinical work, that's usually like the crux of it, is that there's a policy that's in place. You hit a point where that policy is not working for one reason or another, and no one can seem to get around it. And then you have the camp of people who are just like, we're not doing this because this policy doesn't work. And then the other camp of people is, well, I'm going to write you up because that's the policy. And, and there's no like logic to this particular situation. This policy is not working. Let's think about how we can figure this out in this particular situation. 95% of the time, the policy works well. You know what I mean? But there's not always a round peg to fit in that hole. So you have to be able to sort of pivot and say, okay, this policy isn't functional at this moment right now. How can we work together to come around this? And that's I think where people get stuck, because we're so used to, like I said, just blindly doing the thing.
Well, and you said it earlier, right? There's, all these people who are no longer at the bedside writing policies or coming up with solutions to things, who aren't actually practicing. And so this is where that human-centered approach comes back, right? Like you want the people who are actually using the policies and doing all the things to be the ones leading and involved with writing those policies and creating the solutions to do the things. Because otherwise you're going to get a large population that doesn't use it or misuses it or whatever. And it's generally because you didn't have that co-collaboration and buy-in. And it runs the gamut. My poor wife, all I do is look at things and say, like, did they not ask the people who are using this if it worked? Like, why would you keep creating things that don't make sense, that people aren't going to use or are using, aren't working in the way they were intended to? I mean, all I do, it's all I do is like, oh my God, I can't believe they created this way. Like, it just seems so obvious to me, which is probably why I've been led down this path, right? Like, it's so obvious to me. So I was just out. So my friend Emily, she's going to be 40 this year. She had a stroke a year and a half ago, a little less than a year and a half ago. And went out with her a couple of days ago, socially distanced with masks. And she's doing better, but her left side is still weak, and she needs a sling to hold her left arm up. Otherwise it pops out of her socket. She doesn't really have a lot of control over it.
Okay.
You should see. It blew my mind. I was with my sister also. We both, for the few hours we were out with her, could not stop talking about the poorly designed sling that these people who need to use it have to deal with. And Emily was saying, this is the best of all of the bad options that are out there. It was this uncomfortable, completely non-functional, non-working, like Velcro hard nylon strap that like goes around her shoulders, and it didn't even work. Not only is it not comfortable, but it kept coming undone. She she had a stroke. She can't like use her left side, so she's
Right.
trying to like mess with this sling the whole time. It blew our minds. Like, and this goes back to like, you have to start designing with the people who need these products, because otherwise you're just causing them more pain, more harm. She said the sling is so uncomfortable, and it's not doing its job. And so we need to do better as designers, as healthcare providers. Like, it seems like a no-brainer to me. Like, why anybody would even think to create something as god awful as that sling she was wearing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
In this day and age, my sister kept saying, we can send people to Mars. We can't make a sling that's comfortable and works. Like, it seems like, I don't get it. Like, it's so ridiculous that this is the best of all the options, and it was god awful. It's just, maybe that's the problem. People don't, it's not where the money is. It's not sexy. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a shame though.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really big part of it. And then, I think the other thing is, how innovation is driven, right? Because innovation doesn't always necessarily come from like the bottom up. It comes from the top down. People are telling us what it is that we need to do. And they're creating products along what they think that people need and not what people actually need.
Exactly. That's the problem. Yep.
Yeah. Crux of the whole thing. Solved. Problem solved.
Yeah. Just listen to the people. Seems so obvious to me, Angela. Just listen to the people.
Yeah. Listen to the people. But yeah, so anyway, and that brings us pretty much to where you and I met when, so I was marching around in Harrisburg, being frustrated because nobody knows what nurses do. You came to the faculty meeting to talk about the Story Slam, which is another really great idea. And I love this thing because it's an intersection between nursing and art and self-expression. And this is one of the things I think that nurses typically don't get to do, is that, we participate in, and even just the nature of the machine, we participate in all of these. And I know you did it in the MICU, and obviously with all of your cardiac arrests, there are life-altering events that we are participating in that are, extremely emotionally heavy. And then that event ends, and 5 minutes later, that's it. We're done. There's no processing. There's no nothing, and the badge of honor is to be able to segue to the next mundane task without skipping a beat and not having any space for, the fact that, you just dealt with this, horrible experience that just happened. And it's only now that we're just starting to realize the detrimental effects that being, there's a lot of what they call second victim research. There's a catastrophic event, and the second victims are the providers who are there taking care of these people or showing up on the scene. So that's like a fairly new thing. And, it's also in this stage of its development where it's talked about and people are like, oh yeah, we have to take care of the second victims. Okay. Hey, your patient just coded. We're just going to pop another case in there. You'll be good in like 10 minutes, right? You know what I mean? So there's like this whole like, oh yeah, we're very cognizant and aware of the fact that you're a second victim in this whole thing, but you'll be totally fine, like 10 minutes. It'll be okay. Anyway, so I feel like the Story Slam really gives nurses an opportunity to express themselves in ways that they don't get to do on a regular basis.
Yeah, I will say, so It's interesting because if you recall, I said when I was little, I wanted to do something in art. Like I always knew I was creative, and I've always tried to keep that side of me sort of alive in anything that I do. And, I was fortunate enough at the Center for Resuscitation Science in my role as a director of innovation to start thinking more about science communication and creativity. But in this role as the director of innovation, I really get to use those skills in a way that I never knew even like was possible. And so being able to do programs like the Story Slam, which was originally funded through the Sachs Program for Arts Innovation at Penn. And so they did a call for proposals that incorporated arts into a profession that usually is not associated with the arts. And so immediately I knew I wanted to submit a nursing Story Slam application. I had been listening to a number of storytelling podcasts. I had done a couple storytelling events. I thought it was just a great way to amplify what nurses were doing to a segment of the population who probably, like me, had no idea what nursing did outside of what they saw in the media. And I am a firm believer that we as a profession need to be the ones telling our story, creating our own narrative to tell people what it is that we do. And this was a great platform to allow for that. And so for those who don't know, a Story Slam is a storytelling event where participants get up and tell their true real life story based on whatever theme is decided for that event. And so we did one around innovation, obviously. And then last year we did one around courage. And then we're going to be holding our next one in February 2021 virtually. And, we're still sort of figuring out what that theme will be. But it's a great way for nurses to be able to, one, process some of those feelings from that second victim thing that they could potentially be going through. And we've had a lot of nurses who've shared their experiences that way, but also highlight the breadth and depth of what nursing does. And we've had nurses who talked about their military experience. We've had nurses who've talked about how they are storytellers and performers and have used those skills at the bedside. We've had nurses who were expert witnesses in courtrooms, things that people don't think of as the nursing profession come out in these stories in a way that we could never do justice to if it wasn't for the actual person telling their own story, creating their own narrative. So I love that part about my job so much because I get to be as creative as possible. Like sky's the limit.
Yeah.
And this podcast is another way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It really is. I think that I wanted when you and I, before you and I met, this was something that I had kind of thought about, and I tossed it around to a couple people at the School of Nursing, and they're like, that would be a fabulous idea, but that's about as far as it got. So then when you came and spoke at our faculty meeting, I emailed you and I'm like, hey, I have this great idea for you to do.
And I had been, it was on my list. Like, so when we met, I don't think, was I even there full time yet?
You were there full time. It was probably very early on. You're there full time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said like, it was on my list of things I wanted to do at some point.
Yeah.
So I was so happy when I got that email from you.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we connected and you were like, but you're going to have to help me with this. And I was like, oh, I'm not really sure that I'm more of an idea person. So.
And look, here we are a year and some later.
Yeah. I'm like the Tom Haverford of the School of Nursing.
Oh my God. I love it. We're going to have to do a treat yourself day.
Yeah. Treat yourself. Yeah, for sure. Anyway. Yeah. So I was a little reluctant. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but I'm not one to say no. I always feel like you can say yes and kind of figure it out. And I get super judgy when people say no to things, because I'm like, oh, you are clearly not a creative thinker, because there is a way to figure this out. They're not creative thinkers. So the biggest no that I can come up with is like a no, but. I'm like, all right, no, that sounds like a bad idea, but, we could probably do something like this. And then the other thing is like, well, what is this person trying to get at?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we kind of figure something out around there?
That's a big improv thing. In improv, it's yes and
yes.
right, yes, and we do that a lot in design thinking. Also, it's not no, it's yes and, or what if, right? Like it's never no. There's always. I've been saying this for as long as I can remember. There are always multiple ways to get things done. If something doesn't work, there's like 100 other options to try. You just have to think differently about the problem and the solution.
Yeah. So we've been fortunate to do this. And I think, and this is really what nursing is all about, right? All of these, like when I look back and you look back on your career, would you ever have thought when you started nursing school that you would be able to do all of the things that you've done in the context of being a nurse?
Never. I never could have even thought to imagine what I'm doing now, because it just didn't register, didn't exist. I mean, I think in a way the profession is really starting to expand more so now than I've ever seen it expand before, in the way that we think about what nursing is. I think that has a lot to do with social media. I think it has a lot to do with all the things that we've talked about needing to expand the profession and controlling the narrative and really showing the world the breadth and depth of what it is we do. Right.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, and I think that's definitely a really important piece of it. And I think the other piece of it that people don't realize is that nursing is very much the linchpin that holds it all together. We're the one piece that connects to all the other pieces. And we don't get credit for that as a profession. And I think that's something that's really important that we need to do. And as nurses, need to realize how important our role is in connecting all those other pieces.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Again, it goes back. I think we have to be the ones making sure everyone knows that we are that linchpin and that we are experts in all of these areas, and we need to be equally at the table. We need to be leading in these areas. We are, it's not, and people love these hierarchies, but like we're our own profession, and we have the expertise and knowledge, just like physicians, just like respiratory therapists, pharmacists. We all individually as professions are experts in those areas, and it's not a either or, it's an and. Like we complement each other. We're not like fighting against each other. Right. We need to be speaking up and speaking out, especially now during the pandemic and all this racial unease, and be letting the world know that as nurses, we have these points of view, we have these expertise and knowledge that we are going to share equal to all the other professions. And, I think nurses don't see themselves as experts. They don't feel comfortable speaking up. And that's why a lot of nurses don't. And I've seen that numerous times with you, with my colleague. I wrote an op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer a couple weeks ago. And I did it with a colleague who didn't feel comfortable doing it themselves. I've done other things with other nursing colleagues who have said they don't feel comfortable, going on air, talking to the news. And I get it. I hate talking live to news people.
Yeah.
My brain does not work like that, but I do it
Right.
because it needs to be done. And, the profession needs nurses speaking out. And so I hope
Right.
that we can encourage more nurses to speak to us. And I think we're pretty easy to talk to on our podcast. And I
Yeah.
hope that gives more nurses confidence to make the next step and reach out and say yes when there are interview requests that come in, or feel like they can write op-eds, or create a social media account and become that expert. Give yourself that voice on those platforms,
Right.
because we need to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely need to do. We'd be better off if we had more of a voice in saying things. It's interesting. At the very beginning of this pandemic, literally the week that it started, my mom got really sick. And it was a real bad respiratory thing. She's a teacher. And all of the entire cheerleading squad had just been at an international cheerleading competition, and they were all in her classroom. And then she comes up with this horrible cough and a fever, and no one would test her for COVID. So she happens to live in Bucks County. And so I called the Bucks County. I said to my mom, just go home, because she went to the doctor's office. They sent her to LabCorp. LabCorp sent her to the Philadelphia Health Center. And now she's like a possible COVID case, and she's going from place to place to place with all these people. And I'm like, Mom, go home, go in the bedroom, tell Daddy, stay downstairs. I'll take care of this. We'll see what happens. So I call the Bucks County, Department of Health, and I get a nurse who calls me back. And she was absolutely lovely. I explained to her the situation, and I just said to her, I'm really concerned. And also, like, what are we supposed to do? And this was literally at the very beginning when nobody really knew what to do. And so she was very calm, very methodical. We talked about a couple different things. We talked about scenarios, what would happen if, what's the importance of being tested, like this, that, and the other thing. And then she said to me, and, after we went through all the scenarios, and she said, well, I hate to say this, but nobody really knows what they're doing. We're not going to be able to test her. And I really wish they would just let us nurses take care of this, because we'd get it all figured out. And I just said to her, you know what? I think you're probably right. But I don't think my mom had COVID. She got better in a couple of days. I think it was just really bad cold. But regardless, it was a scary minute. And
that's why we need more nurses running for elected office. Just let the nurses handle it. They will figure it out.
Yeah, we always do. That's like the crux of what we do, is working around, the cement bricks people put in our way of our job, like, all the time.
Truth.
Yeah, some of the most creative problems are solved by nurses.
Couldn't agree more. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to end, Angela. This was so much fun.
It was fun.
Looking forward to co-hosting Amplify Nursing with you for a long time to come.
Yes. Well, I have my goal of at least 100 nurses.
Yep.
So well, we've got a few more.
Yeah. Thanks to the pandemic, we doubled our season 1 interviewees, so we're a lot closer than we were.
Yeah. So, true story.
So we're on a break through the rest of August, but for those who are taking the time to listen to this special episode, please check out all of our season 1 and special bonus episodes on the Amplify Nursing webpage, which you can get to through Penn Nursing /research/innovation. And we are on SoundCloud and on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts from. So please check us out and give a listen.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angelarosa DiDonato and Marion Leary, and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. with special thanks to our Department of Information Technology Services for their assistance. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can, please do us a solid and rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.